Hello everybody, today welcome to the Warhammer 40k Iceberg. Today we will be going over this iceberg right here, made by user slash open ADS throwaway or open ads throwaway, I'm not sure, but his Reddit will be linked in the description. But like I said, we will be going over the first layer of this iceberg in this video. Later videos we might have to split it up into a couple videos per layer because it gets pretty complicated, but today we're trying to stick to one video. Then after we do all of those videos, I'll compile them into one giant video, getting rid of the intros and outros, just putting it all in one big thing for you to easily watch it all. This is going to be a pretty long series. It's going to take me a while. Apologies if there's a lot of cuts in this video. I'm not good at this as the first time I'm really doing a video like this. And I have no script because I don't know how to write one. So we'll just be freeballing it and see how it goes. So apologies if there's a lot of cuts in this video, but I just want to make it semi-coherent without me rambling or saying every 5 seconds. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah. The reason we're doing the 40k Iceberg is because I've been really interested in the 40k universe recently, and I've been learning a lot about it, and I thought I'd share that with all of you. Thought you might be interested as well. This video specifically will be for beginners who really don't know much about the 40k universe. This will teach you a lot about it. Not everything, because there is a lot about this universe. But I think it's a pretty cool universe to learn about. So if you'd like to, join me along in this video, and we'll get through this. But without further ado, let's get right into this iceberg. Tier 1, above water. Space Marines. First up, Space Marines. Space Marines, aka the Adeptus Astartes, are the elite soldiers of the Imperium of Man, which is the human faction. These bad boys are barely even human at this point, though. They are so genetically modified and manipulated that they are just big chunkers. They have like 2 hearts, like 4 lungs, something like that, 3 lungs, I think. They are basically immune to poison. They can take a heck of a beating, and yeah, are just really the most one of humanity's greatest weapons against the Xenos, which are all the alien races. The Space Marines also clad a power armor of sorts, not quite like the Fallout power armor, but a little better. They typically use a gun called a bolter, which is like a 50 cal machine gun basically, but a lot cooler. They also use plenty of different weapons depending on like which legion or chapter they're part of, but most of the time they are running their bolters. Now I could talk for days about these Space Marines and not even get close to the end of the wiki page, but we just don't have the time for that now. So if you really want to get into them, just look them up on the wiki page, or there's plenty of videos on them. They are very, very popular, and don't worry, we will be learning a lot more about them throughout this iceberg. They're pretty much on every tier, part of them at least. And yeah, just that's it for the Space Marines. Next up, Necrons. Next up we have the Necrons. The Necrons are one of my favorite Xenos factions in the Warhammer 40k universe, and they also happen to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest, going back to over 60 million years ago. Necrons are basically base Terminator mummies, is what they basically are. Back about 60 million years ago, they were a normal flesh race, but they were tricked into giving up their souls and their bodies, and they were turned into mechanized machines of war. But they turned on the people who betrayed them, and then they kind of killed all of them, I think. But eventually they sealed themselves within these tomb worlds, and have been mostly asleep for the past 60 million years. Some of them are waking up at different points in time. A vast majority of them are still asleep though, and a lot of them have broken down over time just because of just sitting there for 60 million years. So most of them wake up as just brainless machines who don't even have consciousness, but some of them do wake up with very high intellect and personalities. We'll get into that later, but that's the basics of them for now, and there's a lot more lore, and I'm really not getting into it as much as I could. Definitely look these guys up though. They are my favorite, and I would definitely recommend watching a video on these guys. Ultramarines. Next, we have the Ultramarines. The Ultramarines are a specific chapter of the Space Marines in the 40k universe. These guys are basically like the poster boys of the Space Marines, and if you've ever seen a Space Marine, you've probably seen an Ultramarine. They are usually in their blue and gold armor. Yeah, they are the 13th Legion in the chapters of the Space Marines, and are still one of the most loyal chapters in the 40k universe. These guys are basically the Boy Scouts of the Space Marines and follow the rule books to the letter, and are pretty boring, to be honest. They are just like well, not boring, but like in the Captain America way of just like, oh, we gotta follow the orders, you know? So some people like them, a lot of people like them just because they're very represented in the lore, but they have almost as much lore as just the Space Marines in general have. So good luck trying to figure all that out, because there's a lot. Orcs. Next on the list, we have Orcs. Orcs are your typical Orcs in any fantasy world you'll find. There are a few key differences. There are a few key differences, mostly the use of guns and spaceships. They really don't have much technology at all. They just kind of throw crap together and pretend that it works, and somehow it does. So that's basically the Orcs. They aren't psychic, like they can't have psychers, but if enough of them believe something, it typically works. So they kind of got this weird power, and they're very dumb, so they can't really use that to their advantage most of the time, unless they get lucky and just believe something stupid. A good example of that is they think the color red makes stuff go faster. It just painting your car red makes it drive faster, and it does. It somehow does. So yeah, they're very strange, but really cool race, and they have a lot of cool lore with them. Not a ton, but a good amount, more than most. So I would definitely look into them. They're not they're weird. They're weird organic creatures. They're actually kind of a fungus more than like an animal. It's kind of weird. If they die, they kind of just decay into fungus and then regrow. It's not known if they keep their consciousness after that, but you kind of have to burn them to nothing to actually kill them. So there's a ton of orcs, and they just keep growing, and they're actually really tall, about the size, like about an 8 foot tall if they stretch out their back, but they like to hunch over a lot, just like me. So they're actually pretty powerful, and yeah, one of the more formidable Xenos in the universe, simply by their sheer amount of them. Eldar. Next up, we have the Eldar, or the Eldari, I think is how you pronounce it. The Eldar are basically also from pretty much any fantasy world, elves, but in space. So they're pretty cool, but kind of boring, a little snooty. Your typical elves in pretty much any fantasy world, like I was saying. But they used to be a very powerful race. In fact, they pretty much ruled the whole universe, or galaxy, I think it is. But eventually their overwhelming pride and just lack of care, really. They didn't have a lot to work for, so they mostly just did a lot of crap to fill stuff. They get depressed, I guess, and just started trying to feel something. It can lead to a lot of things, as you can imagine, but it eventually spawned a Chaos God because they did it so much, and the Chaos God Slanesh ended up consuming most of the souls of the Eldar. So now they're a pretty small race, but they're very powerful and very good in combat. So they're definitely not something to trifle with, but unless you have a lot of people. So that's the Eldar/Eldari. Tau. Next up, the Tau. The Tau are an advanced race of multi-species. They are basically your advanced mech wearers, advanced sniper rifles, stuff like that. They really like to fight from afar. They're a pretty small race as it is now, but they're they're expanding pretty rapidly. If anything, these are the good guys of 40k. It's been kind of revised recently-ish, but they're the closest thing we've got to it, I think. So there's not a ton of lore on the Tau, but there's some good videos to watch on them. I definitely recommend them, but basically they're just your advanced alien race that uses technology more than skill or quantity. It's quality over quantity, basically. These guys are pretty cool. Mostly weeaboos or weebs, as it is. Yeah, that's the talent. I definitely recommend looking up those guys. They're pretty cool. So on to the next. Chaos. Next up, we got Chaos. Chaos is essentially just a psychic energy, which is basically the magic of this universe. It lies within the it lies within the Immaterium, which is basically the Nether in Minecraft, but for the 40k universe. It makes up a majority, if not all, of the Immaterium, aka the Warp, and is used by psychers and daemons and chaos gods as a sort of energy, aka like the magic of this universe. It's a highly unpredictable force, especially if you're in the realm. It can do all sorts of crazy stuff, but chaos is used by a lot of things coming up in this iceberg, and I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of that later. Tyranids. Next up, we got the Tyranids. The Tyranids are the bug race of the 40k universe. What I mean by bug race is they're basically a hive mind, and there's not a lot known about them specifically. I'll put up a few pictures just kind of to show what they are. It's kind of hard to describe them. It's very different. Basically, they just eat up all the biomass that they can on any planet. Wood, trees, just humans, orcs, whatever they can possibly consume, they do, and they turn into more Tyranids, bigger Tyranids. And they're kind of just like a cancer in the universe, and they are kind of just spreading and taking over as much as possible. They are probably one of the biggest threats right now in the 40k universe, mostly because there's not a lot known about them, and they're very, very hard to kill because they are very numerous. They are totally biological, and they're basically immune to any biological warfare, which sucks because, you can't just poison them because they're either immune to it or they will become immune to it because they adapt very easily and very quickly. The Tyranids have come from the outer side of the Milky Way galaxy, and we really don't know exactly where they've come from. Most call it the void is where they come from, but that's kind of a vague statement in and of itself. But there's a theory that the Tyranids have actually surrounded the Milky Way galaxy, or have already surrounded it and are starting to make their way into it. So we could be dealing with a massive Tyranid invasion coming up soon. So we'll see how that goes in the future. But for now, they're just the hive mind bug race. So yeah, it's Tyranids. Inquisition. The Inquisition is basically the SS, the KGB, FBI, CIA, all wrapped up into one, and are put in charge of the many worlds that make up the Imperium. They try to keep everything under control. They're basically the secret police force. They basically try to keep out any spies or implants into society. There's a lot of Tyranids, for example, that will pretend to be humans and will take over human bodies and stuff like that. And they kind of try to figure all that out and get rid of them as soon as possible, because if that happens on a world and they start spreading, and that place is basically gone. Inquisition is also the one that has the power for the Exterminatus, which you might have seen memes for. Exterminatus is basically just destroying an entire planet. It's very heavily memed that it happens a lot, but it very rarely happens, if at all. So that's basically the Inquisition, just a military police force above the law, and really don't answer to anybody. So they're kind of scary as long as if left unchecked, and most of the time they're left unchecked. So good luck running into one of these guys. Adeptus Mechanicus. The Adeptus Mechanicus is up next, aka the Cult Mechanicus. The Cult Mechanicus is basically a cult about technology. They love technology, they worship it, they sleep with it, they do everything with it. They're originally based on Mars, and you might find it weird that they are a cult, aka a sort of religion. The Adeptus Mechanicus isn't exactly part of the Imperium, but they've kind of adapted into it and let them slide because they build all the machines, weaponry, and armor for the Imperium. So they're kind of in cahoots with them, basically part of it, but not really. The Mechanicus originally started on Mars, and they kind of took over that place, and then that fell. But now they're kind of just this widespread like factories of Hive worlds, basically. All they do basically is make the weapons, armors, and stuff like that for the Imperium, and they just and they're just kind of weird. They kind of worshiping a machine god, so that's kind of strange. But yeah, they're kind of chill, so it's pretty cool. There's a game about them, so check it out. Yeah, that's the Adeptus Mechanicus Imperial Guard. Next up, we have the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard is the main military force of the Imperium of Man. They're made up of regular dudes sent to them by their worlds, and they're basically just the army, but like times a million of them. They're generally handed pretty crappy like, weaponry and armor, but there's just a lot of them, so most of the time they just rely on numbers and just sending forces at the enemy to take them out. Yeah, they're not very complicated. There's a cool bit of lore with them, but they're basically just foot soldiers, and there's a lot of them. So, yeah, that's the Imperial Guard. Krieg. Next, we have the Krieg, which I'm going to assume is the Death Corps of Krieg, because Krieg is a planet where the Death Corps come from. There's some stories from there, mainly one book about it, but the Death Corps of Krieg is a kind of like the Imperial Guard, but specializing in uninhabitable planets and environments. So yeah, they're a subsection of the Imperial Guard, but they're very different based on their appearances and their attitude. Mainly the, not necessarily want of death, but yeah, basically the want of death. These guys will run in headfirst into the most hazardous environments that they can find. They love it. They absolutely love getting into the worst scenarios. They're pretty cool, and I definitely recommend checking out either just the story of the book or just reading the book in general. It's a really cool story, and I definitely recommend it. But that's all I've got to say for now about the Death Corps of Krieg. Hive worlds. Next, we have Hive worlds. Hive worlds are your basic world in 40k. They're essentially Coruscant from Star Wars, but on almost every other planet for the Imperium. They are just so jam-packed and full of human life. It's kind of insane. Some would compare it to like slums, basically, but just built on top of each other, like almost infinitely, fitting millions and millions of people, billions even, in just one city sometimes. It's a Hive city. But basically that just made up of a whole world. So basically a ton of people on just one planet. So you can imagine it'd be hard for like the Inquisitors to find like a secret Tyranid invasion on it. But yeah, it's just basically a dystopian world full of as much life as they could possibly fit on it. Most of the time they have the forges there. They have a lot of factories there making just your common stuff, just like factories of random stuff they make there for it, for civilization. But yeah, that is the Hive worlds, and yeah, just a lot of people. Sisters of Battle. Next up, we've got the Sisters of Battle, aka the Adeptus Sororitas. The Adeptus Sororitas is kind of like the Space Marine. It's like a Space Marine chapter almost, but made up entirely of women. They're not as typically gone into battle as like Space Marines or Guardsmen, only being called in every once in a while. Sometimes they have similar duties to the Inquisitors, but basically they're just a women faction Space Marine almost, but it's kind of its own thing. They're basically space nuns, but with weapons and can fight, so they're pretty cool. I've got a good bit of lore behind them taking place in some of the main events in the 40k universe, so definitely check them out. But that's it for the Sisters of Battle. The Emperor. Next up on this iceberg is my own entry, the Emperor of Mankind. For some reason, it's not on this list that I can find, so I put it here at the top because it's a pretty common thing to know about in this universe. So I thought I would just touch on it real quick, and we'll get on to the rest of the iceberg. But the Emperor of Mankind, aka the God Emperor, is a man who brought a human civilization up to the next level, eventually getting rid of all religion and bringing together humanity basically under one flag. But basically, he's the grandpa space marine, the first space marine. He's not really a space marine, but he is just a dude that has just been living forever. No one really knows why, but yeah, he's brought humanity to a whole new level and has made it become one of the most powerful races in the 40k universe now. He's currently dead, kind of. We will touch on that more in just a second, and even later, about the Horus Heresy. But just remember that, and yeah, I just wanted to touch on him real quick and add him to this list because he wasn't on here, and I think he should be. So, on to the next. The Golden Throne. Next up, we got the Golden Throne. For some reason, this was on the list next, before the Emperor was even on the list. So I thought I'd put Emperor on first to explain this one a little better. The Golden Throne is a massive cybernetic life support machine. It has been keeping the Emperor alive, kind of, for the past thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. So it's basically just a giant modified life support machine is the basics of it. It helps him channel his psychic energy, the Emperor that is, or is believed to do so, but we don't know a whole lot about what's actually happening to the Emperor right now, but again, we'll touch on that more later with some theories later in this iceberg. Primarchs. Next up, we've got Primarchs. Primarchs are basically the genetic sons of the Emperor himself. There are about, I think, 20 of them genetically engineered. They're basically the leaders of their own Space Marine chapters, genetically modified, such as the Space Marines themselves. They each have their own unique one. Each of their legions are very different from each other. Some of them are kind of similar, but there's a lot of differences with them. Mostly the Space Marines that are with the Legion, that they rule over, basically, are genetically modified to be like the Primarchs and have their own personalities that are kind of akin to the Primarch. So think of the Primarchs as Jango Fett and the clones as Space Marines, basically. It is just, but if they just used 19 more people than Jango Fett, and had different clones, but that's kind of the same thing. Primarchs have a lot of history in the 40k universe, and I'm not going to go over all of that because that would take forever, and this video is already getting long enough, so we will be moving on to the next thing. Genestealer cults. Next up, Genestealer cults. Genestealer cults are a subsection of the Tyranids. This is what I was talking about earlier with the Inquisitors. The Genestealers' main plan is to take over the Empire through the next few generations and have the children become basically sleeper agents. So what they do is they find a human that's isolated, basically. They kidnap them and steal their genos, whatever. So what they basically do is they kidnap a person, kind of hijack their DNA without the person ever even knowing about it because they've been hypnotized, kind of. And that person will go on living their life normally without really even knowing what happened. But their children will be kind of different. They'll have different colored skin, like bluish skin or something, or just have some weird appendages or something. They'll just be a little weird. And then the next generation of those will be even more different. And they're basically the kind of Tyranid sleeper agents. And that's what the Inquisitors helps out a lot with, getting rid of a lot of that. Otherwise, the Genestealers would have already taken over the Imperium. But yeah, basically just I think about it. Like chestbursters from Alien franchise, but kind of different. So that is it for the Genestealer cult. On to the next. Traitor Legions. Next up, we have Traitor Legions. Traitor Legions are the Space Marine legions that have betrayed the Imperium. During the Horus Heresy, they were corrupted or went over to the Chaos side, basically. There are currently 9 Traitor Legions right now. That includes the Imperial's Children, the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, World Eaters. A lot of legions you don't know about yet, and that we'll touch later on. But basically, if the Ultramarines were a Traitor Legion, they would have gone to Chaos and would have become demons, basically. So that's basically what Traitor Legions are, just demonized Space Marines. The Warp. Next up, the Warp. Won't spend too much time on this one because I've already touched on it previously with the Chaos. But the Warp, aka the Immaterium, is a space between spaces, is a different dimension, basically, that people have learned to travel into. It is the home of the Chaos Gods, the Daemons, and the Traitor Legions right now. The Warp is a smaller space than regular space and is used to travel quicker between distances in space because they don't really have like hyperdrive stuff in 40k. They basically just travel into the Warp and come out at a totally different spot. Basically a wormhole, or like I said earlier, like traveling through the Nether in Minecraft. Every block in the Nether is 8 blocks in the overworld. So think of it like that, just Minecraft. So that is basically the Warp, just made up of chaos energy and storms and demons, and you don't want to be there. So that is the Warp. Return of Gillan. Next up, the Return of Gillan. I don't know if this is up here. I feel like it'd be in the second layer because it's not that commonly known, but I guess it's up here for a reason, so I'm going to be covering it. So a while ago during the Horus Heresy, Gillan actually died. Kind of died. Was severely wounded by his brother, Fulgrim, who was corrupted at the time as a Traitor Legion, has recovered and has been revived by a priestess, and is one of the few remaining Primarchs that are actually loyal to the Imperium, that are actually alive right now. So they couldn't kill off their poster boy, basically, so they wanted to keep him alive. So he's still here, and he's still kicking, so. Kurtan. Next up, we've got the Kurtan. Yes, that's how it's pronounced. It says it on the wiki, so don't come at me if I said it wrong. But the Kurtan is basically a very advanced alien species that lived at the same time as the Necrons were humans. They're actually the ones that tricked them into losing their souls and bodies, and they were actually a very, very powerful race that consumed stars. But eventually they lost their war against the Necrons after turning them into robots, and the few that survived were broken into these like shard things. So they're almost gods, basically, broken into shards and are used by the Necrons as like powerful mystical items, or as like Pokeballs. They kind of use them to fight, basically, using the Katan's technology, or using the Katan's energy with their, and yeah, basically used as just powerful mystical items. And yeah, they're kind of been reduced to almost nothing now. So that's the Kurtan. I think that's how you say it. Trzin the Infinite. Next up, we have Trzin the Infinite, one of my favorite characters in the 40k universe. Trzin is a Necron overlord. Basically, he's one of the Necrons who were revived with a lot of his intelligence and used to be part of a powerful family in the, I guess still is, of the Necron race. Although he prefers to keep to himself, actually, and he basically has a giant museum that he keeps a ton of relics about. He's very interested in history, and is basically the collector from the Marvel movies, if you remember him. He's so infatuated with the past, almost to a fault, and he's part of the book The Infinite and the Divine, which I definitely recommend giving it a read or listening on Audible. is basically a story of two robot old men fighting, and it's great, and definitely recommend it. But that is Trzin the Infinite. Again, one of my favorite characters, and definitely recommend checking it out. On to the next. Psychers. Next up, we've got psychers. Psychers are one of the coolest parts of the Warhammer universe. Psychers are basically, like I touched on earlier, the magicians or wizards or sorcerers of the 40k universe. Typically humans are psychers, but there's some other Xenos that can be. But they're actually heavily despised in the Imperium of Man, because if one draws too much power from the warp or is not skilled enough at it, they can be corrupted by a demon and then basically used to kill a bunch of people. So usually they go kind of crazy and then just go off and kill a bunch of people. So they're heavily sought against or despised in the Imperium. But they're actually really cool, and most of the Primarchs are actually psychers. The Emperor himself is actually one of the most powerful psychers in the 40k universe. But yeah, that's psychers. Moving on to the next. Katchan. Next up, Katchan. Katchan, much like Krieg, is a world, so I'm going to assume they're talking about the units that come, or the military that come from the world. Katchan, the Jungle Fighters, is what they're known as. They're basically the Rambos of the Imperial Guard. Much like the Krieg, they come from a very uninhabitable planet. They're very skilled and very resilient. These guys were raised in one of the most hostile environments in the 40k universe. The world is basically a death jungle where every plant and every animal is always trying to kill them. They're very well known for their knives, the giant, like almost machete-like knives that they use to clear out brush and also fight with pretty commonly. They're also what the Space Marines use, the same knives, because they're very durable and very reliable as a knife, and you'll definitely hear some more about these guys. So yeah, these guys are pretty cool. Kind of like the Death Corps of Krieg, but a little different. Yeah, basically just Rambo, gun-ho enthusiasm, you know. These guys are pretty cool though, so definitely check them out. Abhuman. Next up, we've got the Abhumans. The Abhumans are genetically modified humans that have kind of just been put off to do their own thing. Most of them have come from genetic experiments, gone wrong, and have kind of lived off on their own. There's a few different ones, most notably the Squats, aka the dwarfs of the 40k universe. It's not very commonly known that there are dwarfs in the universe, because there are not very many of them and not frequently talked about. Games Workshop has kind of forgotten about them, but we have not. There's a few other types like beastmen, stuff like that. Just genetically modified humans, basically. Not a whole lot of details. There's some cool stories on the background of these guys, so definitely look into them. There's a few different ones. So yeah, on to the next. Custodians. Next up, we've got the Custodians. The Custodians are basically another version of the Space Marines, but they have a very specific duty, to guard the Emperor. These guys are one of, if not the most, skilled warriors in the 40k universe, but they're not utilized much because they're sitting there guarding the Emperor, which is basically a skeleton at this point. But they're pretty cool. I've got some stories about them, but basically they just guard the Emperor, and they're pretty freaking cool because these guys are very skilled and very good at what they do. And last but not least, Dark Eldar. Next, we've got the Dark Eldar, aka the Drukhari. These guys are basically just the Eldar, but they are evil, even more so than the Eldar. The Eldar aren't necessarily evil. They're basically just kind of jerks. But the Drukhari, or the Dark Eldar, are actually the worst. They will skin you alive, they will torture you, and keep you alive as long as possible, for hundreds of years if possible, torturing you the entire time, just to keep Slaanesh off of their backs. Basically, if they cause pain, they can keep themselves from dying and becoming going to Slaanesh's realm in the warp. So yeah, the Drukhari are probably one of the worst races. If you were to get caught by them, you'd want to die as fast as possible, because these guys are not going to let you. They are going to torture you every single second for as long as physically possible. It will keep you alive, and just, yeah, they're very sadistic, and yeah, definitely don't want to get caught by these guys. But that is it for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've stayed through this whole thing, please again forgive me for if I've stuttered, stammered, whatever this entire time. Again, it's probably going to be highly edited, but hopefully it's watchable. But again, if you stay through this whole thing, again, I just want to thank you for watching. I will be working on the rest of this after I post this video. But again, it's something different, weird that I've never done before. So again, it's probably not going to be that great starting out, but it'll get better as time goes on. So really, I just want to say thank you for watching, and have a great day.